Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the WWF Insiders Series virtual event. My name is Jake Sokol, and I work with WWF donors on the East Coast. In a couple minutes, I'll introduce Erin Simon, who will talk to us about WWF's vision of no plastic in nature by 2030. But before I turn it over to Erin, I want to point out a few things about today's virtual event. We will have time for questions following the presentation. If you have a question and you would like to ask Erin, please use the Google form below the video player in your web browser. Our team behind the scenes will be monitoring your submissions throughout the presentation, and we will try and answer as many questions we can during the Q&A portion of today's event. If you would like to maximize the size of the video screen, float your mouse over the video player and click on the expand icon at the far right of the toolbar on the bottom. To exit out of full screen mode, which you may want to do to submit a question, you can minimize your video by pressing the escape button on your keyboard. And a final note, we are recording today's webinar so we can share it on the WWF website. Now, for today's topic, plastic is found in every corner of the world. And for many of us, it's a modern convenience that we now depend on. Plastics help make our hospitals safer, our food last longer, our packages more efficient to ship. But the amount of plastic we now see in nature has become a crisis. Plastic particles have been found in the most remote environments, in our food and water, and in hundreds of wildlife species. Everyday plastic items that end up as waste in nature will take hundreds of years to degrade, negatively impacting ecosystems and their inhabitants in ways we are just beginning to understand. Solving this crisis will require coordinated collaboration on an unprecedented scale, and WWF is leading the charge. By uniting our global network of industry leaders, consumers, and policymakers, we are transforming our systems so the plastic we discard becomes plastic we use again. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Erin Simon, WWF's head of plastic waste and business, about the work she is doing to engage with companies on the crucial role they play in finding solutions for this issue. Erin, we're excited to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Jake. Appreciate it. I'm really excited to be here today, talking about some of my, some of the most important issues we're working on. I thought I'd start just and share a little bit about my background, so you guys know where I come from. I have been at World Wildlife Fund for 9 years. I just had my pandiversary. And before that, I was at Hewlett Packard for 10 years. And before that, I was learning how to become a packaging engineer and material scientist. But what I really like about material science is the ability to really reimagine how we think about materials and how we use them to make lives better and to do more. And so when I first started out my career, it was a really focused on, innovation, right? But I realized pretty early on that there was this inequitable amount of time that I spent as a designer, as an engineer, on figuring out how do we use the materials. I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about where they came from or what I did when I was done with them. So as I came to World Wildlife Fund, my role was really to help companies like I had, where I came from, to rethink, how we were using materials and how we were sourcing them and to make better decisions. And so today I'm going to talk about a specific issue in the material science space, which is the plastic waste issue. I'm going to share a bit about what WWF is doing to address it. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what my part in that is, and then I'm going to help you guys to understand what part you can play in it, because we truly all do have a role to play. And so I'm going to start with some images of this issue. And this is one of the things that WWF does so well, right? We take you to a place by showing you pictures, right? And unfortunately, some of these images around the plastic waste issue are sort of sad, right? And it's from the beginning, it's been images like these that have really united our response on this problem. We have this responsibility to care for wildlife, to ensure that thousands of wonderful and diverse species have a healthy ecosystem that they can thrive in, right? So unfortunately, like Jake mentioned, these everyday plastic items that are ending up in nature and taking forever to break down, while they're there, they're causing a lot of problems. And we know that sea turtles and birds and seals and even manatees were some of the first species to have ever recorded to have suffered the consequences of plastic pollution. But it's been estimated that actually over 700 species have come in contact with it. And researchers are predicting that by 2050, 99% of seabirds will have ingested plastic. So, humanity has already really wiped out 60% of vertebrate species since 1970. So at the rate we're going right now, if we don't do something about this, plastic waste will continue to be a factor in the health of our ocean species. And we know that healthy oceans are essential to our lives, right? They hold roughly 97% of the water, but they also produce more than half the oxygen we need to breathe. Just think about that for a second. Every second breath you're taking while watching me babble on is something that the ocean has helped provide for you. And the oceans provide food for us. The seafood accounts for 1/6 of the animal protein that we consume. They're also a significant economic driver, providing incomes for people in fishing and tourism industries. And these are really important in middle and low income countries. Pollution like this can pose a significant health risk, right? In places where there's not a lot of waste infrastructure, there's a lot of burning of waste, and that can release toxic gases, which makes it hard to breathe, can cause respiratory, heart, and nervous system damage, sorry. And then, of course, pollutions like this in this picture along coastlines where it accumulates can be these favorable breeding grounds for disease-carrying organisms like insects and rodents. So, with many issues of biodiversity loss, the loss of marine wildlife disproportionately affects the world's poor, affecting these populations of people who live in places that lack adequate waste infrastructure, and they are therefore more dependent, obviously, on populations of wildlife for food and income. And we know that middle and low income countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, pictured here, have more plastic pollution than anywhere else in the world. And the magnitude of waste is so much higher because they tend to have less efficient waste management infrastructure to actually recover it, to recycle it, than we have in other higher income countries. So plastic pollution is also adding risk, right, to their health, of their economies, from local communities and livelihoods. In this way, it's reducing the health and abundance of fish populations, and this causes direct effects for local communities who depend on fisheries for food and livelihoods. And it becomes an added challenge, right, to these communities that are already facing resource scarcity and climate change. Pollution is a symptom of other challenges faced by impoverished populations. And that is the significant cause of this pollution is lacking infrastructure, right? And that's often driven by lack of resources that municipal governments have for critical services. So, like other global crises that we're facing, the pandemic is only making things more complicated, right? Today, single-use masks, latex gloves, other personal protective equipment, PPE, these have become features of our daily lives, right? And we're going to all say that's for good reason. At the same time, the use of plastic in shopping and in other sectors has been hit harder by the crisis and has possibly decreased. And so there's this question, will the pandemic end up producing a larger or smaller plastic footprint? It's possible, right? Early evidence is suggesting that we know that PPE is for sure trickling into our oceans. A recent study published suggests that COVID-19 has triggered an estimated 129 billion face masks and 65 billion gloves used additionally every month. They say that if you stitch all of those masks together, it would take up the entire land mass of Switzerland, for example. And that same study is estimating that by 2020, we will produce 30% more, so nearly a third more waste than 2019. So while we don't have actual data yet, right, we're still in it. The likely result will be there will be a net increase in waste. And we know that because of that, and because our waste is already entering our ecosystems, that this additional waste will also find its way to nature. And so, to be clear, we're not about to ask medical professionals to take a break from their life-saving and sort through the recycling. And frankly, we have seen that PPE's critical role during this crisis is an important reminder of some of the benefits that plastic can offer to society, from the face masks and the test kits that have turned out to be some of our greatest weapons against the disease, to even the plastic wrapping that is extending shelf life on our food. And so we've said before, we're not We're not saying that getting rid of plastic is the answer, but if we're not going to quit plastic, we really need to develop a healthier relationship with it and fix the broken pieces of the massive system. So, WWF is going to tackle this problem the same way they tackle other complicated conservation challenges. They're going to take this one planet approach, right? They want to make sure that they are considering all of the things that we're trying to protect as they address the plastic waste crisis. This is a large scale problem. It's going to demand an equally large scale response. And so we are going to unite our global networks of industry leaders, of consumers, policymakers to transform the system so that the plastics we discard can become the plastics we use again. This is going to mean reducing our plastic wherever possible. Also, it's going to be about reimagining how we source, design, reuse, and dispose of plastic materials upon which all of these communities are depending on. To do that, we're going to need some big changes in consumer behavior. We're going to need some big changes in the private sector's approach to the way they produce it, the way they manage it when it's done. And if individuals and companies are going to be successful to chart a new course, then they're going to need governments to provide some clear guardrails and cities to participate. To achieve this vision of no plastic in nature by 2030, we're going to need to tackle this complex issue in a holistic fashion. We're going to need to touch every single intervention point along the life of the plastic. And so it's my job as the head of plastic waste and business, along with my amazing team, to help companies to play their part. So we are partnering with businesses across the planet to redesign how we source, use, and dispose of plastics. And so we think that by inspiring action across their sectors and supply chains, that we have the potential that for as few as 100 companies to prevent roughly 50 million metric tons of the world's plastic waste by 2030. And the great news is that some of the world's most powerful companies have already gotten started, right? They have these large scale plastic commitments to reduce, resource, recycle, and more, but they just don't quite have the path to get there yet. And here's why. It might be hard to believe, but plastic is a relatively new material to the world, but it's now ubiquitous, right? So half of the plastic that has ever been made was produced in the last 15 years. And that's been driven largely by the fact that it's demanded by so many people in industries, right? Healthcare, transportation, electronics, construction, food, they all rely on it because it's low cost, high performing, and it's really versatile. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, we spent a lot of time, rapidly innovating how we're going to use it and coming up with all these different types of it that we way outpaced our ability to actually do something with it when we were done with it, to recycle it. Let me take a glass of water. And this is especially the case in areas of the world where their populations are growing and economies are growing. And so to get out in front of this, to solve this problem, we really need to start at the root cause of it. So science is showing us that 80% of the marine litter, and so marine litter is the plastic that's going into the oceans, is coming from land. My goodness, so sorry. We joked about needing water, and I'm really needing water. So this means that most of the plastic trash that we see in the oceans today is coming from a broken waste management system on land. And so we needed to understand that, right? This major root cause, to look at not only how we use it, but what happens when we're done with it. So this kind of tells us we need to go beyond that idea of just getting rid of straws and shopping bags. While important, right? It's a key piece of this, you can see. It's not going to solve for it alone. So we need to tackle this complex issue in a holistic fashion, one that's going to engage the problem at key intervention points, like you can see here, along the entire life of the product. It's not going to be just one, right? It's not going to be one single answer that's going to solve this problem. And to get there, we need to have everyone. We need to have governments, business, and public engaging in a way to make that real meaningful change, so we can use and reuse plastic a lot better. It's going to be an entire paradigm shift in our relationship with plastics, though. And it's not going to be up to one group of people. It's going to be up to everyone to do their part to solve for this. And so we must, think about the way we're interacting with these materials all the way through their life. And we need to do it in a way that we don't negatively impact other critical issues that WWF is trying to address, right? And that could be climate change, forests, it could be food waste. So we have launched Resource, which is plastics we have launched Resource Plastic, which is WWF's activation hub. This is for companies that are ready, like I had said, to take that ambitious commitment they've already set into action, right? I want to be clear here. We need companies to be successful in their meeting their commitments in order for WWF to be successful in meeting our goal for no plastic in nature. And so we needed a program that closed that how gap, that took us from commitment to action. And so the way we do that is by helping companies to really understand, first of all, what their footprint is, right? So if they can measure where it's coming from, what they're making, and where it's going, then they can really understand where they have the biggest impact. And so if we can maximize where they're targeting their impacts first, we're going to have a greater long-term result, right? And if when they're asking those questions with their peers, in the same way, when they're measuring the same things, it's going to be easier to identify opportunities to collaborate and to innovate at scale, right? And so what Resource is doing is trying to solve what has been this impediment to progress so far in the plastic waste space, and that's measurement. So we developed a framework to close this measurement gap, and that's called the Resource Footprint Track. Erin, I'm going to share a video right now that talks a little bit more about that.
Plastic waste is poisoning our planet, and we can't fix the problem without the help of businesses across the world. To make a difference, companies first need the tools to measure exactly how much plastic they're using and track where it ends up, whether it's recycled, incinerated, landfilled, or discarded in nature. Resource Plastic fills this critical measurement gap with an innovative framework that helps companies analyze plastic use within and beyond their supply chain to identify the activities and cross-sectoral collaborations that could make a measurable difference. Now, we've released the Transparent 2020 report. Thanks to the thorough reporting of our partners, we were able to analyze the plastic footprint of 5 leading global companies. And with a consistent framework for measurement, this corporate transparency can help develop innovative solutions that can scale through collective action. Using our Resource Footprint Tracker methodology, we're measuring companies' progress against 3 key objectives. First, eliminate unnecessary plastics by reducing single-use items and adopting reusable systems as an alternative. Next, invest in sustainable production, using less virgin plastic while increasing recycled content. And finally, set a goal to double global recycling rates by developing a specific plan for each country. If enough companies join us, we can gather the data needed to prevent more than 50 million tons of plastic pollution by 2030 and make an impact on the global plastic waste crisis.
Right. So as this video touched on, our annual transparent reporting series is a critical feature of our program. So this first report, Transparent 2020, was released in June. And so it debuted what is going to be this annual reporting series to track progress against these corporate plastic commitments. So this first report shows the initial results from the tracker and established a baseline for us to measure the progress of member companies year over year. The footprints are actually really quite unprecedented and really detailed for the first time. And so that's allowing us and member companies to sharpen the focus on the interventions and to take action where that data says it will maximize the potential for impact. It's going to allow companies for the first time to ever to see shared challenges and, more importantly, shared opportunities, right? Because we need companies to work together to leverage their collective power, their collective resources and influence and actions so that we can move a lot quicker. And by 2030, we want this annual report to showcase that these companies, and then hopefully additionally those other 95 I was mentioning, will have together prevented a total of 50 million metric tons of plastic pollution. So that's our North Star. And so the findings of this report, they link how much and what kind of plastic companies are using to where it ends up in the world, and then uses that information to shape recommendations for actions and collaboration. And we frame the results against our theory of change, which was about 3 target areas to focus on with the member companies. The first is eliminating unnecessary plastic, so get rid of what you don't need. And then for what you do need, make sure you're making out of sustainable inputs like recycled content. And then, of course, third, we need to make sure we double global recycling and composting. Another key result out of this report was that the process itself of developing this first report identified an overarching need for better and more representative data. And so we've got a lot of work to do moving forward. But I want to share some specific examples of how this helped us really create this data-driven path. I mentioned that now we have this clearer picture of what's happening. And so when we sat down with companies to talk to them about what we needed them to do, it was much easier to have those conversations. So one example of this is around the US itself, right? So all 5 of these resource companies that participate in the report are US based. And the US represents the single biggest opportunity for recycling for them. And that's because they have high sales volume in the US. There's limited recycling infrastructure in the US, and we have really high landfill rates of 72%. What this means is there's this big gap between how much plastic these companies are putting into the system and then how much is actually getting recycled in the US. This is an incredible opportunity for them to come together and close the gap. This data point also shows us this bigger systematic issue in the US, which is that it's cheaper to landfill plastics than it is to recover and recycle it and use it again. And unfortunately, that hurts us because plastic has an inherent value, right? We need to make sure there's a market for it. And so we also recognize in that the system-wide change we're talking about to realize a circular economy for plastics in the US, that can't just be solved by companies. So sneak peek, announcing and launching next week, the US Plastic Pact will be launched with over 60 signatories. And what it's going to do is bring together activators across sectors and industries to collaboratively share learnings and drive actions in the US. The US Plastic Pact will foster collaboration and industry-led innovation between companies and governments to meet a set of ambitious targets and shared goals by 2025. More to come next week. On an individual company level, this baseline assessment helped Starbucks to realize that the current set of goals they had didn't address the key areas of impact that their footprint showed were most urgent. And so through this process, we were able to overhaul their goals and help them engage more immediately where it matters the most. So we identified that we need to focus on recycling of their cold cups and address some of their more problematic small plastics and moving to a reuse model. And then finally, a number of the members found a high percentage of polypropylene, PP, in their US footprint. And the challenge here is that we need to increase polypropylene recycling in the US. And we also need to increase its use of recycled content. And those 2 things obviously work very closely together. Today, the US recycling rate for polypropylene is close to 0. And so right now we're using less than 1% post-consumer content. And so we supported the launch of this multi-stakeholder organization with a number of the members. And so the Polypropylene Coalition is setting out to be the change agent and to champion the recovery and recycling of polypropylene. So the goal of it is to really think about increasing access in curbside pickup, making sure it can be sorted better in the facilities, and then of course maintaining quality, this vibrant, robust end market for using it for recycled content. So I've spent a lot of time. I spend a lot of time these days really talking about how I can push these large multinational brands to do better. But I really want to emphasize here that there's this role for each of us in this and how we can each rethink our relationship with plastics. And I want you to start by taking action. And this seems really simple. But I think when we're tackling any of these really complicated global issues, it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to feel like the actions we take are small and they're just not enough and they don't matter. But they do, they really do. So joining this webinar, learning more, this was a great start, right? And if the only thing you do beyond that is choose to not use a straw or choose to bring a reusable bag, that's great. Those are actions, right? I need you to take those. And I want you to know that you're not alone in feeling overwhelmed. In fact, sort of a story on the side that comes from this, reminds me that this picture reminds me of is that when we started this out, I think we all of the stakeholders who were trying to solve for this problem felt that same way. We all felt overwhelmed about this. I think there was brands, there was governments, there was NGOs, all of us, wanted to do something, but we realized really quickly that it needed to be together. It needed to be a coordinated systems approach. And as you can imagine, with all of those perspectives and agendas at the table, that can be tough to do. And so I was a part of an expedition that was designed to sort of break down those barriers. And this is a picture of me actually on a beach in Bermuda, picking microplastics out of sargassum grass. But when we weren't on this beach, we were all trapped on a ship. And I say trapped because we had chosen to do that, but we were all stuck on the ship. And our choices were to work together, to have tough conversations, or to really jump into the Atlantic and in 9,000 feet of water and clean plastic out of sargassum grass that was floating there. So it was great. I mean, because on the ship were CEOs of chemical companies and brands and retailers. There was NGOs and collaborators. And there were some really extreme NGOs. There was Break Free from Plastic, and there was Greenpeace, and we all sat down and really started to get through these tough conversations. And while the actions coming out of that at times felt small, they were really important in catalyzing the work that has happened in the last few years. So it's just about getting started. It's doing those things first. And so one of the things you can do, right, is rethink how you use plastics on the go. I know not all of us are doing a lot of on the go these days, but when you do, think about water bottles and shopping bags and to-go containers. If you want to push a little bit further, think about bringing your own silverware, napkins. You can do those same things when you're in your home, right? Rethinking what you can reuse. But there's going to be times when you still need to use single-use plastics. And so when you're using those, you can carefully read labels and see if there are options to buy materials that are made of recycled content. You can also try to choose items that are in packaging that's accepted at your local recycling center. And then, of course, you want to make sure you're still choosing things that are keeping your food fresh, so we avoid food waste. And finally, I really want you to recycle smart. Check with your local recycler about what is acceptable. Make sure you are following those guidelines. My mother, bless her heart, will literally listens to everything I say. She wants to just do what's right all the time. And she is somebody who I would call as an over recycler. And that's because she just wants so badly for everything to be recycled. She can't stand the idea of sending it to landfill. And so she puts it all in the bin in hopes that they will just eventually start recycling it. And the challenge there is, while that intention is so good, is that she's contaminating her bin of recycling. She's making it more difficult for the recyclers to pull out the stuff they can recycle. So, it's important to do that piece that is set that we have, that your local recyclers can do now, and know that things like the US Pact are trying to make that better, right? Trying to fix the system that you are engaging in. Finally, you can advocate, right? You can advocate in many different ways. You can do it simply by using your purchasing power. You can do it by using your vote. If you really want to talk about what's getting recycled in your bin and you want to have a conversation, reach out to your recycler, find out why, write letters to your councilman. There's lots of options from small to big that you can take action on. World Wildlife Fund is fighting, right? We're fighting for a world with no plastic in nature by 2030. I don't want to start with these pictures where there are animals trapped in nets and where there's families floating in trash while they're trying to feed themselves, right? We want a world where our oceans are teeming with marine life, not nets, not bottles and bags. We don't want humans breathing toxic fumes because we're burning plastic. And we, of course, want all of these plastics that we sometimes really depend on, to be used to make another when we're done with them. So I hope you all want to be a part of that. I hope you all want to act. And so I want to open it up to questions to talk about how.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing this important work, Erin, and exactly what we're doing to address it with action, and what everybody else can be doing personally as well. We'll now turn to the questions submitted via the Google form and do our best to get to as many as we can. First question from David. Is there such a thing as sustainable plastic?
Oh. So a word like sustainable, right, is it depends on how you define it, right? But the way I define it, the way WWF defines it, is you want it to be sourced from a place that it can be renewed, right? So today, a lot of our plastics are coming from non-renewable resources. They're coming from petroleum and natural gas or coal. But in the future, a renewable resource would be recycled content. It would be sustainably sourced bio-based. So if it was coming from from a sustainable source, and then it was being used in a way that was adding value, right? And then was ending up in a system where it came back. So if that was recycled, if it was reused, if it was composted, that's what is the North Star for what I want for sustainable use of plastics, right? Knowing that we're not going to get rid of them because that has other implications. How do we drive those elements of their life that are not sustainable today?
Thank you. Question number 2 from Julie. How can philanthropists be most effective in furthering this mission? What specific actions can they take? Advocacy from within the corporate world, investments in plastic alternatives?
Those are good questions. Some that we are like dabbling with right now. A couple ways that I see us, you being able to drive this from a philanthropic point of view. One, right, is I think investment in efforts to drive those key stakeholders, right? And that's the corporations are one, but the governments are really important, especially here in the US, right? We need to have a complete overhaul of our waste management system in the US. And so we need to be really influencing governments and then cities and states to comply with that. Because we need, as a part of that, we need to have consistent recycling in the US. I don't know about you, but that's really frustrating. And we need to have better investment in the technology for better sorting. We need to have better policies on how to measure it and what we're reporting on. And we need to have more quality materials overall coming through that. So that's one area, right? I think we can also think about how we can influence the financial community to not only hold our stakeholders accountable, but also to be investing in new innovations, right? And that could be new materials. As long as we hold those materials to the same standard that we're holding plastics, right? Right? We want sustainable sourcing, sustainable use, and sustainable management at the end. But we also could invest that in technologies that make it easier to recover and reuse, right? So that could be new reuse systems. Like how could you implement a really great, easy to use reuse system in a city that's low cost for all, thinking about all those different economic groups. It could also be looking at different types of recycling technologies that make higher quality products on the back end of the recycling system. So there is literally so many ways to engage in the plastic waste system right now, like from a financial perspective, because there's just so much to be done. So hopefully that gave you some targeted ideas.
Great. And from Jessica, do you have any advice for people in areas that don't have a local recycling center? Well, I would love to take steps to help get a center established.
Okay, a couple things you can do right now, right? There's an organization called TerraCycle, and you can pay essentially for them to send you a box that takes your recycling back and they recycle it, right? That's you doing what is normally subsidized by your taxes and paid for by your municipalities. So that's the short-term answer, right? Because if you're like, I just want to take action now. I think the other one is really trying to understand, why there's challenges to having recycling in your community. Is it the distance you are from a MRF, that's a material recycling facility? Is it about the fact that there's just not enough money in your municipality to pay for that service? Is it because there's some other agenda at play, right? Finding out the root cause of that really will help you to think about who are the right stakeholders you need to influence. Now, one thing that we're thinking about through the US Pact is that we will be able to push for on the policy side of things to help create national legislation that will roll down to communities to have access for all. That's a really important piece. So, but I'm really excited that you want to do something to drive it in the meantime.
And one other one, I would love to ask, I think that given our current state of affairs and everything that's going on in the world, there's a lot of doom and gloom. And it's hard to avoid those headlines, but I would love to know what gives you hope.
Well, so when we think about these really large, like sort of messy problems that we're trying to solve for in the conservation space, um, with this like sort of unifying theme that we see through all of them is that you need systems change, which means like every single thing you think is a part of the solution set needs to collectively and in a coordinated fashion change at once to solve everything. And that's really difficult because number one, you have to have everyone around the table agreeing they want to do that in the first place, and then from there taking coordinated steps to do so. And where plastics and the plastic sector and this plastic waste pollution, plastic crisis is ahead of that is that everybody's at the table. And there's momentum from governments, from cities, from individuals like you guys, from NGOs, from brands to do something. Everybody's like leaning in on it. And so I think we have hope to do that, right? I think we're going to hit a tipping point and things are going to start to change. And I know that feels overwhelming at times, and it feels like each of us in our little piece of that, in our little slice of that, we're like, are you leaning in at the same time? Like, is the thing I am doing mattering? Does it matter? Sorry, great English. But it does, because, everything is going to catch up. So I have a lot of faith that we're going to fix this one and we're going to get it right. And so, yeah, I definitely have hope. It's not going to be clean. It'll be sloppy, but it'll get there.
Well, anything worth doing is worth doing the right way. So thank you so much. That about does it for us this afternoon. Thank you, Erin, for sharing your work with us and your positivity. And thanks to all of you who carved out time in your schedules to join us for today's installment of our Insiders Virtual Event Series. I know there are a lot of questions on local recycling, and we hope we answered them. If you do have further questions, feel free to submit them to events@wwf.us.org. And we are actually going to also follow up with an email that has a link to the recording of today's program, along with a survey about your experience. We want to make sure we adjust and improve future events where we can, so please be honest. Finally, we hope you've enjoyed these series as much as we have over the past few months. We love bringing you closer to our work on this platform, and we have no plans to stop. We will, however, be taking a break on September 3rd in observance of Labor Day, but we'll return on September 10th and continue every other Thursday at 2 p.m. until we can once again be together again. Please keep checking your email inbox or wwf.events.org for more information. Thanks again for joining us and for your commitment to conservation and WWF. See you again next time.
Your passion and generosity are helping build a more resilient future for nature and people. And while we are all staying home and staying safe, your commitment is still helping to make conservation progress happen all over the world. From the U.S. Northern Great Plains to the Arctic, from the Eastern Himalayas to the savannas of Africa. Your commitment fuels work that safeguards local communities, iconic wildlife, and vast land and waterscapes. Together, we're developing innovative solutions to ensure the health of our planet.
Your support is helping to take us to a whole new level in our work.
Support that people like you have provided has achieved so much.
Thank you for your generous support.
Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you for your support.
We can't do the work that we do alone.
We're doing all of this great work at WWF. We have all of these amazing supporters out there. And it is really nice to be able to connect with the people that enable us to do this work.